For 3,000 years, mankind has fought battles on the sea, a history of power that separated the conquerors from the vanquished. The Greek fleet prevailed over the Persians. Britain used naval superiority to build an empire, and with the help of Navy guns, America won its independence. Hello and welcome to part one of the Villages Media Group's Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes. I'm Larry Elb. This is the aircraft carrier USS John F. Kennedy, based in Mayport, Florida. From her flight deck 25 years ago, Operation Desert Storm was launched. Like many ships past and present, she and her crew stand ready to defend our freedom, a duty shared by countless other gallant Americans. In the next half hour, we will introduce you to some of the nation's finest men and women who hoisted anchor and sailed into battle. They are America's seaborne heroes. Among today's weapons, many consider the carrier the ultimate in the projection of power. Strength at sea, once matched by the awesome firepower of the battleship. And few battleships can claim more renown than the USS Missouri, the Mighty Mo, a storied history of which Robert Wygand played a part. Before even setting foot on the USS Missouri, Bob Wygand was already in select company. He was called a plank owner, a member of the battleship's original crew, which allowed him the rare experience of witnessing her launching.
Sure, we were right on. And she hit the thing, the bow in the front with the bottle of champagne and all that stuff. And
commissioned in 1944, the Mighty Mo hurried to join the fight in the Pacific, a cruise that included squeezing her 108-foot beam through the 110-foot wide Panama Canal.
But the ship doesn't go through dead straight, you know, it goes sideways. And we're taking concrete off the side of the canal.
Once in the Pacific, the wild ride continued. Before the untested crew saw combat, they had their nerves tested by a typhoon.
And that's kind of vicious and wicked, you know. And a ship of that size, it's bouncing around like a cork.
In the battle zone, she unleashed her mighty 16-inch guns on Okinawa, Iwo Jima, and Japan. Firepower capable of recoiling the 58,000-ton ship 200 feet in the water, as well as pinpoint accuracy from 25 miles out.
And we were shelling into Japan with the lookout and everything. You know, they let go of the fire, and you can see this beautiful building here, all these smokestacks up, and you see a hit. You know, you see bing, 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 all the stacks going down like that.
As a surface lookout, Wygand also kept watch for incoming danger, like when a kamikaze slammed into Missouri's bulkhead. Little damage was done, but since the pilot was an officer, he was given the courtesy of a formal burial at sea.
And then we all had to get dressed, full whites, light a bugle, salute the whole schmear after this guy tried to kill a whole bunch of us.
A gesture also symbolic of a dying empire. And when it was time for the final measure of capitulation, the official Japanese surrender ending World War II was signed on Missouri's deck.
My mother sent me a little clipping out of a newspaper called, I think it was the Long Island Daily Press or something at that time, saying that they're going to sign the surrender ceremony aboard the Missouri. That's how I found out from my mother back home. Nothing on the ship.
With a weapons upgrade to add Tomahawk and Harpoon anti-ship missiles to her already formidable arsenal, the Missouri was recommissioned and sent back into battle during the Gulf War in 1991. During World War II, Allied forces didn't have the luxury of giant cargo planes to deliver supplies. Materiel and troops had to be ferried across the ocean by convoy, a line of lightly armed ships which were easy prey for German planes and U-boats. So the escort carrier was developed to counter those threats. The baby flat tops were originally built on the hulls of merchant ships and oilers. They were half the size with a third less aircraft than attack carriers, but they were still lethal to the enemy, as John Simpson proved aboard the USS Nihonto Bay. Stephen Reynolds has his story.
Yeah, I've been into boating, I guess, ever since I was a kid. Enjoy it very much.
One would think John Simpson would be a little sick of the water after what he endured during World War II.
A couple times we came close with typhoons, and they had suicide motorboats galore in those straits. Cannibalism later on, near the end, that was a very, very close one.
John can laugh now, having survived these harrowing experiences, which he asked for when he was just 18.
I had to go to my father to get him to sign off, and he says, well, he says, you're probably going to go in anyway, whether I sign off or not. And I says, probably so, Dad.
Like so many of his generation, John was anxious to do his part. He decided the Navy would allow him the opportunity to combine his love of the water with his desire to fly. John was trained to be a gunner on a torpedo bomber and ended up aboard the aircraft carrier USS Nihonto Bay. And so began the adventure of a lifetime and a bond that will never be broken.
The ship is everything, because after all, that's your home.
And their home, as well as their very lives, were often in peril, like the time the Nihonto was hit hard in the China Sea and in need of repair.
And they knew we were limping home, so they were out to kill. Finish us off, let's put it that way.
When not enduring the wrath of a Japanese attack, it was nature's fury they had to deal with.
They're worse than a hurricane. A typhoon is worse than that's why the Japanese call it the divine wind, because that was going to be the wind that would blow us out of the water. And we went through 3 of them.
Even after armistice, there was no safe harbor for the Nihonto Bay.
We were shot at. And all we could do is holler up, hey, don't you know the war's over?
The Nihonto and John made it back. He resumed his life with his wife Barbara, embarked on a successful career, and never relinquished that love for the water. A full life that he fought for.
But I survived, and very, very fortunate. Thank my lucky stars, no doubt about it. I don't know who was looking down on me, but that's the way it was.
And Simpson's heart still belongs to the sea. When he returns to his Clayton, New York home for the summer, he volunteers as a tour guide at the Antique Boat Museum. Still to come.
My Uncle Jack and his 2 brothers were all in the service at the same time, over in the Pacific. And his father had thought up a clever way of trying to find out where the boys would be.
How 3 brothers fighting in World War II kept in touch with family through a unique tracking system. When Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes continues. Welcome back to Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes. The Village's media group salute to the men and women who brave the high seas and the enemy to take a stand for freedom. We are aboard the USS John F. Kennedy, based here in Mayport, Florida. You know, letters from the battlefield were usually the only link between families and soldiers during World War II. However, opportunity and security restrictions could limit the amount of information those letters contained. But as Christine Eschenfelder tells us, one father developed an ingenious method to keep track of his 3 sons as they fought across Europe and the Pacific.
During World War II, Seaman First Class Jack Purdy was a supply clerk aboard the USS Macon Island, one of the ships involved in the invasion of Iwo Jima. Purdy had no children, but his niece, Nancy Burkett Luther, remembers him fondly.
He was a good Christian man, and everybody liked him.
Luther enjoys recalling stories about her uncle. Purdy and his 2 brothers were all serving in the Pacific at the same time. Their father devised a clever way to find out exactly where they were.
He knew what size stationery the boys would have to be writing home on, because the war had been going on for a little while. And he found maps that were the same size. So he gave the boys the maps, he gave the wives of the sons the maps, and he and his wife kept a map. And every time one of the boys wrote home, he would put a little pinhole in his letter as to where they were, and it matched on the map. And then they would get the letter at home and hold it up to the window, see where the pinpoint was through the paper, and match it up to the map, and they'd have a pretty good idea about where they were in the Pacific. And that was some degree of consolation to them, I think.
Purdy wrote many letters home, like this one discovered by his niece.
They just passed the word over the announcing system of the death of President Roosevelt. This is certainly a blow to the nation and the world. And
as much good as he has done, there is no doubt he will enter the gates of heaven on merits alone. Since I heard the news, my mind seems to be blank, so until later, cheerio and thumbs up. Love, Jack.
Little did Purdy know at the time, one of his brothers had been killed in action.
I can't believe that I passed over all this information over the years. And then it dawned on me that, oh, hey, this is a good story. This is a piece of history.
History and those who made it, kept alive by those who live on. For Faces of Freedom, I'm Christine Eschenfelder.
Jack Purdy returned safely from the war, as did his brother Thomas. Their brother Bernard, however, was killed on Luzon. Speed and maneuverability made destroyers well qualified for anti-submarine warfare, a task the USS Softly excelled at in the waters off Guadalcanal. But 20 years after earning 16 battle stars in the Pacific, duty called from the Atlantic. And taking part in the Softly's mission during the Cuban Missile Crisis was Captain Delio Lopez Jr. Rebecca Underwood has more.
This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba.
In 1962, President Kennedy made this announcement. Del Lopez was stationed in Key West, just 90 miles from Cuba, and soon would be headed into the middle of the crisis.
The chief I worked for told me they were going to come by and pick me up, and I asked him what for, and he said, I don't know.
Lopez was taken directly into the rifle range. He and the other sailors were trained on everything from pistols to machine guns, still with no idea what mission they were about to face.
And we still didn't know what was up, but we had a pretty good idea something was going to happen here.
Unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island.
As an electronic technician on the USS Softly, Lopez was in charge of making sure all radars and communication equipment were running smoothly, a job both vital and difficult. The Softly's mission was hunting for Soviet subs and doing it with aging equipment.
So they got somebody and took me down to the equipment room, and I wasn't familiar with that radar. It was pretty old, and it stood in a big high rack with handles in each rack. I stood there looking at it with no idea in the world what to do. So I grabbed hold of the handles of the machine and frustration said, what am I going to do? And all of a sudden, all the lights came on, all the needles went over, and I said, this thing's starting to work.
Lopez retired as a captain 33 years after serving aboard the Softly. What began as an educational opportunity turned into a learning experience like no other. Captain Lopez received more than 24 awards and honors while enlisted, and he was also chosen from thousands to serve as part of President Kennedy's honor guard during a trip to Cuba.
The Navy gave me an opportunity that I didn't have anywhere else. I was able to serve my country and enjoy it while I was doing it, and I wouldn't trade that for anything.
During his 36-year naval career, Captain Lopez was also trained as a pilot and flew with an electronic warfare squadron. Straight ahead on Faces of Freedom.
The ones on the starboard, on the port side, thought when those guns went off, the way the ship would rock, they said, oh no, they got us that time.
U.S. and Japanese battleships go head-to-head, and Cecil Davis had a front row seat. That story when Faces of Freedom returns. Welcome back. We continue now with a look at the faces of those who help preserve freedom and shape a nation. The men and women of our armed services who put their lives on the line and became America's seaborne heroes. Well, it was full speed ahead for our next American hero. From the moment he joined the Navy, Cecil Davis was thrust into a world at war. And it didn't take long before his ship went head-to-head with Japanese naval forces. Mark Giblin has the battle at sea.
On December the 7th, when the Japanese hit Pearl Harbor, I was scheduled to go on leave. So I had to cancel leave. They said cancel all leaves, and so I never did get to go back home until about 24, 25 months later.
Instead of getting to visit his family back in Georgia, World War II officially began for the United States, and gunner's mate second class Cecil Davis set sail aboard the USS Washington. With orders to intercept a Japanese convoy, the Washington and the USS South Dakota headed to Guadalcanal.
They saw another ship approaching and they fired on it. And when they did, the Japanese battleship turned the fired on them back at the flash and made a direct hit, which knocked them out of commission.
The Japanese destroyer, the Kirishima, turned on its searchlights to finish off the USS South Dakota. Davis and his crew came to the rescue.
We were right on target, and he let go all of it at one time. There was one salvo, and that ship sank within 6 minutes' time.
This would not be the last time Cecil Davis would see action. Later aboard the LCI number 1070, Davis found himself off the coast of Okinawa, providing support to ground troops by firing rockets to shore. At night, they were ordered to protect the larger ships from kamikaze pilots, almost becoming a victim themselves.
I could see his teeth grinning, you know, that close he came to our bow. I could have picked him off with a rifle if I had one in my hand and had permission to fire. I could hear bullets going by my head. Goes, wing, wing. That was the closest, I guess, I came to being hit.
Danger was everywhere. Kamikazes, gunfire, and planes falling from the dogfights above. There were plenty of close calls for Davis.
That plane fell and hit close enough to our ship to splash water upon the ship. So that was a close call there, too.
Davis returned home safely after surviving one of the most deadly conflicts the world would ever see, making him a true hero. For Faces of Freedom, I'm Mark Giblin.
Cecil Davis's final assignment before being discharged in 1947 was on the USS O'Brien. He took part in the testing of the atomic bomb off the coast of the Bikini Islands. Straight ahead, when Faces of Freedom continues.
When I joined the Navy and realized what went on with what people in the service did, then I think I got a lot more respect for my dad.
Like father, like son, how the attack on Pearl Harbor shaped two different military careers. When Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes returns. Welcome back to Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes. I'm Larry Elb. December 7th, 1941 transformed Pearl Harbor from an anonymous port to a flashpoint in history, a place and an event that helped define a nation. It was also an important thread that tied together the military careers of a father and son. Here's Kevin Coughlin.
I can't remember seeing it burning and all like you see in the newsreels. I don't remember any of that.
As a 4-year-old on that fateful Sunday, memories are limited for Al Cope Jr. Recollections not of hostile action, but reaction.
We heard some planes come over, and I can remember the telephone ringing, my dad getting a call saying he was recalled immediately, that the Japanese had attacked Pearl Harbor.
For 2 days, his father helped man the guns aboard the USS Selfridge. It wasn't his ship, but it was his duty. Courage and adaptability that defined a long and illustrious naval career.
So he's what was known in the Navy as a triple threat because he'd been on ships, submarines, and was an aviator.
When college didn't work out, his dad gave him 5 choices: Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, or Coast Guard. He picked the Navy, and it was his father who swore him in.
I was worried I wasn't going to be up to either the family standards, and I'm not just talking my dad, because my uncles were in the service too. It worked out that, you know, I just went ahead and did my thing, and it worked out to the good.
A career of uncanny parallels. Al Cope Jr. spent 25 years in the Navy and saw his share of combat in Vietnam. He finished as a double threat by qualifying on aircraft and subs, including a duty station at Pearl Harbor. The same place, but a changed place, where the scars of war are still poignant reminders like those left on the men, neither fully healed.
We finally got him to write something about it, but he didn't write much about what happened at Pearl Harbor. I mean, he wrote that he was there, that he was on a ship there, and about the attack, but he didn't write much at all. And I think it's a shame that his generation didn't sit down and try to document some of the stuff because, you know, it's missing now, and I'll never know it, and neither will my children or my children's children. So.
In a bit of historical irony, during World War II, Cope's father also flew blimp patrols over the Atlantic. Later in his career, he served as commanding officer of the Lakehurst Naval Air Station, the site of the Hindenburg explosion. When we return.
We just got outside of the harbor and you could still see New York City lights, and almost we were hit with 3 torpedoes.
A German submarine torpedoes the world's largest tanker, with New York City as the backdrop. The story of Paul Biesick, when Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes, continues. Welcome back to the Villages Media Group's Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes. In times of war, the transportation of resources and cargo is vital to success. But when the Navy's efforts need to be directed toward the fight, it can leave few assets responsible for resupply. That's when the Merchant Marine steps up. A peacetime fleet dedicated to commerce, but in times of conflict or emergency, it becomes a military auxiliary, with a mission every bit as dangerous as those undertaken by warships. In fact, the Merchant Marine suffered the highest casualty rate in World War II. Paul Biesick nearly added to that statistic when his tanker was destroyed by a German submarine. Jessica Kiss has more.
Well, there I am, right there.
The front page photo of a newspaper yellowed over 6 decades bears the smile of then 17-year-old Paul Biesick. The newly trained merchant marine had just returned from his first ocean voyage.
The Merchant Marine carried all those troops, carried all the bombs, ammunition, tanks, airplanes, and any war material overseas for the soldiers to use.
Such valuable cargo made these ships highly prized targets. On April 16, 1944, the SS Pennsylvania, one of the largest tankers in the world at the time, was leaving New York, carrying thousands of barrels of high-octane airplane fuel among other war supplies, when it was attacked by a German submarine hiding in the harbor.
We just got outside of the harbor, you could still see New York City lights, and almost we were hit with 3 torpedoes. I opened the door and I saw a big hole in the deck.
In a split-second decision, Biesick and a few other crew members ran toward lifeboats on one side of the ship.
I found out lifeboats on the other side were being sucked into the ship.
Only half of the crew survived. Destroyer escorts traveling in Biesick's convoy rescued him and some others, but not before enduring fumes from gasoline.
My head was spinning, just going round and round from the gas. Just dizzy. Just real dizzy.
Lost in the attack were shipmates and his belongings. The U-boat responsible for the losses was located minutes later and blown to the surface by destroyer escorts, the USS Joyce, Peterson, and Gandy.
Most people couldn't ever believe that the war came that close to New York. They couldn't believe it was that close to shore.
Biesick would travel the Atlantic and Pacific for a total of 5 years. For his harrowing experience, a Merchant Marine combat bar with 1 star, signifying the brazen attack on the SS Pennsylvania. For Faces of Freedom, I'm Jessica Kiss.
To commemorate his service, as well as that of his brothers, in September 2005, Biesick joined 80 other merchant mariners in Washington, D.C. to visit the World War II monument. Those are just a few of our seaborne heroes, faces to whom all Americans owe a debt of gratitude. There were many more who bravely stepped into the line of fire, all in the name of liberty. And here's a look at some more of them. Petty Officer First Class Robert Ludwig was a Navy salvage diver. While recovering a safe from a sunken destroyer, he was depth charged by a minesweeper tracking a Japanese submarine. Chief Warrant Officer Wars von Silo spent 23 years in the Navy. He was involved in a 26-hour gunfight support mission near a Vietnamese airfield that helped turn back an assault by the Viet Cong. Fred Herman reached the rank of gunner's mate 2nd class during his 6-year stay in the Navy. He saw action aboard the USS Harold C. Thomas in the Battle of Tarawa. Yeoman 2nd Class James Stewart was aboard the aircraft carrier USS Franklin when it was attacked by a Japanese plane off the coast of Japan. 724 sailors died, 265 were wounded, including Stewart. That will wrap up part 1 of Faces of Freedom. We hope you enjoyed it. Please join us for part 2 when we will introduce you to more of America's seaborne heroes, like Gerald Peace, whose 33 years of service saw him at Pearl Harbor during the Japanese attack, as well as the Battle of Iwo Jima. And we'll go below the surface with submarine warfare, and Ivan Jocelyn, the weapons officer aboard the USS Sea Poacher during the Cuban Missile Crisis. All this and more in part 2 of the Villages Media Group's presentation of Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes. I'm Larry L. We'll see you then.
Faces of Freedom, America's Seaborne Heroes was presented by the Villages Media Group in partnership with Properties of the Villages and Comcast.